Welcome, everyone. Dr. Thor here. Let's pick up with part 3 of my series of how the Western thought was perverted and destroyed by Eastern belief systems. Perverted it was, really. And you have to remember that European culture is only, in terms of the advanced European culture, was originated in Greece and in ancient Roman, or what is considered Italians. Everything comes from that today as well. Now, again, you've been pushed away from it. You've been told lies, and the fact that people consider, quote, Italians as jokes because of World War II and their poor performance is all part of the plan done by the Middle Eastern Arabs that have distorted everything. So the bottom line is everything went through Greek, and then ultimately the Romans picked this up and used all that philosophy, training, engineering, understanding, everything, and then filtered it through their very genius advanced minds, building amazing structures like the Acropolis and the many structures built in, quote, Rome and Italy, the Colosseum. The Romans were able to take giant Egyptian monuments and move them from Egypt into Rome, which is what they've done there. I don't know how many people understand that. We would probably be impossible to do that today. And if we did do that today, it would cost trillions. So we all have to understand this as the bigger picture here. And this isn't talked about because there's this basically disrespect of the Greek and Roman cultures because of what they manifest themselves today, particularly the Greeks, which are nothing more than an olive-selling, low-class, horny civilization infected by what is the Islamic culture, thinking, and perverseness because they invaded that. And I think people would be hard pressed. What comes from Greece today, or even the last 100 years? Anything? Well, they've even lost the quality of their foods, their olives. People don't buy Greek olives, they buy Italian olives, thinking they are the best. What comes from Greece? Well, got me by that. Nothing. Olive leaves. Some of the horriblest food made. Tell us about it. Hey, Kojak, baby. No, something good. Nothing. They do nothing, they contribute nothing, and they are put upon by their neighbors, the Turkey, who is always trying to attack them and massacre them, as they've been doing for thousands of years, because the Turkey, or the Arabic family known Turkey, has seized Constantinople and has murdered the Greeks who were occupying it, and of course have murdered millions of Christians, particularly Greeks. So it's still a tension area, and rightfully so. So what comes from Greece? You got me, baby. No cars, no engineering, no technology, no nothing. They can't even get credit for olive oil. So we understand that, and these tensions go on to this day as Greece is concerned about the invasion and the war possibly between the Greeks and the Turks. And of course, we've allowed the Turkeys to be in NATO. Another reason to pull out of that place. What a joke. So this is the reality that we have of this particular understanding and functioning in society today. But you don't know that. You don't think nothing about it. Now, again, the Italians have kind of been laughed at. Most of this comes from World War II, as they weren't the great fighters. There wasn't Italians that conquered things. They had trouble in their colonies in Ethiopia, which Mussolini pleaded for help to do that because they needed his colonies to keep his country going, and none of the West helped. Who helped? So cool. I've got little leather pants on. I walk around the mountains and poo in it. And it's so smelly nice. So the whole idea is this: who came to his aid, as it came to the Spanish dictator, another scumbucket that was in power for another 20, 30 years after World War II. And Hitler used to test his weapons out on Spanish revolutionaries. He would bomb them, gas them, torture them, all in the good German way. It's so efficient. So, I mean, this is exactly what was going on there. So he united himself with these two people. And sadly, Mussolini was so stupid that he got caught in with this because he was the only people that would help him. And ultimately, there was an awful lot of Italian resistance against the Germans, Italians that helped the Americans. But the bottom line is that they still were working for the Das Führer because they were cowards and not overthrowing Mussolini. But they did overthrow Mussolini and hanged him in the street for his traitorous attitude towards the actual Italian people and almost destroying that country. But when you look at Italy today, which again is disregarded by the Muslim Central Europeanists and other ones like the actual Brits, which are basically half Germans, and the Germans, who are all Muslims. That's where they come from. They're Iranians. So it's always been kind of a joke. Oh, those dumb Italians, they're emotional. Well, it's all nonsense. If you think about it and you look at Italy today, what's the most popular food around the world? Pizza, pasta, etc. The Italian food. What are the best fashions? Gucci. You want the best of leather? You get a Gucci. You want the best of fashion? It's an Italian. So this is kind of the ridiculous reality that is ignored by most of it. You want good cars, you want the fastest cars, you want cars that are really engineered, that look cool. Well, you better go to Ferrari, Lamborghini, etc. You're not going to get that from the shoebox crap you get from Porsche. Let's make it look like a square box. Yeah, let's put on them lederhosen, those leather pants that you poo in, and you can eat it later. So this is the kind of crap that you run into. The inferiority of the Muslim engineering, otherwise known as German engineering, is comical. And we'll get into all the details of that in other videos as well. The bottom line is that if you want cool engineering, advanced engineering that looks good and functions well, you don't get a shoebox Mercedes. You get a Ferrari, you get a Lamborghini, and all the other ones who have advanced, beautiful engineering that's out there, not the garbage you get from Porsche. So this is, of course, of how it's been done. Of course, a lot of the engineering in general comes from that. And, of course, this has been pushed over because of the lack of educational structure and the problems with thoughts that now all of our high-techy type stuff certainly doesn't come from the Deutsches, the German basic Arabs. Well, all of this computerized tech is coming from the Indians, from India to a large extent, because that's where their educational push is. But you're not going to say, well, gee, I want a great car, I want a fancy car, I want a powerful car, I want the best car, the fastest. Yeah, Gupta's new car ran on compressed air. We're going to use this. Oh, it's so beautiful. Let's sit in the lotus posture and think about great engineering. No, you don't do that. And this is not a criticism of any particular cultural society. These are statements of fact. So if you really want the best fashions, the best food, the best technology, particularly in engineering of automobiles, you go to Italy. Who, by the way, makes extremely wonderful whiskey, wines, you name it. They have the best, and they usually produce it at fair prices, unlike the basic old crap you'll get from the basic Arabs that call themselves Germans, who want to charge you 10 times the price for an inferior product. So where's all this come from? Where did everything come from in general? Now, we all talked about how this stuff generally filtered through Egypt, and of course all of this filtered through Greece, filtered into Italy, through particularly the structures that did everything, as much as people may want to criticize them, which was the monastery society, which of course was set up by the Britons as well. You got to remember colleges like Cambridge, and etc. They're all based on the Catholic system of education. You were supposed to be a priest and you weren't supposed to be married, just like we have from all of that. So you've got to understand the British system, as it is even today. The Queen, or now the Kingy, is the head of not only England, it's head of the Church of England. So we have all this mixture in there. Now, who kept all these records, wrote all the text down? Well, it was the priests. They were the scribes. They copied books. And where did all this originate in? Well, it originated in Italy, or the Roman Empire. And it was the monastery system with all their libraries that recorded and kept everything. So where was the recipes for beer, pretzel, sausage? Ooh, it came from little Hans dancing in his little leather shorts on the mountains of Goofball Land. Really? You ain't got it right, baby. This all came from the monasteries in northern Italy that kept the recipes for beer, for pretzels, and for everything else that society has, particularly everything that the Deutsches have, that they haven't invented anything. And German engineering is, let's make it look like a shoebox. Until you buy Chrysler, and then everything looks like an SUV. Finally, we think different when we steal. And this is, of course, what's happened with everything. You're not going to find a single original idea in any place in Europe in general, unless it is connected through the Roman understanding of things. Certainly modern Deutschland, or modern Germany, which is infected with Islamic thought, has invented nothing. There's nothing we can pin to any of these people in general. Every single thing that you think comes from this society has been stolen from someone else, right down to candy bars, Twinkies, and everything else you can think of. But this dominating society of hoodlums and scum have told you differently. And of course, it's just them jokey Italians known for the mafia and for just a bunch of scum buckets. And of course, that's what modern society has told you about the Italians. After all, it's all the Godfather, huh? Yeah. Yeah, well, they excelled there too. The best gangs, of course, are the Italian gangs, which grew out of vigilantism to fight the Germans, ironically. So the whole idea is that's where it all comes from. We have to understand that. So the bottom line is that's what reality is all about. So where does everything come from? What is the infection in Western society? Well, we're going to continue to discuss this as we go on through the different parts of this. But the bottom line is that this is the way information came here. And of course, a lot of this information is also tied into the Asian, who had their own builders and geniuses that came from these ancient societies that pretty much invented everything way first. Certainly when it comes to Western society, who's recorded things like the printing press and other things, the Chinese had it way before anybody. And again, we discredit the Chinese as a violent goofball group of communists that don't really know anything. Of course, this couldn't be further from the truth. Again, pushing the Middle Eastern toxic slave evil mentality that comes from there as usurping all these other inventions, etc. I hope everybody understands that. So, when I hear all these things, I can always tell a person's level of understanding of how they look at different societies, different things. And I hear this all the time from people. I've just heard this from someone who claims he lived in Germany and is an investor and says how organized and perfect in some ways that this society is. A society that can't even really pick up their trash, whose streets are filthy and broken up, you have trouble walking on, who have graffiti everywhere. What are you talking about? These people lived in a fantasy world interpreted through the eyes of their dominating society, and then give credit to people who are failures who've created a horrible, mediocre society. But they don't get it? Why don't they get it? Well, it's interesting. I know why they don't get it, because intrinsically they're weasel weaklings who bend over to people that have an obnoxious language, an obnoxious present, and they just can't wait to bend over to get out of conflict. It's all complete lies and misunderstandings. And the people that talk like this are people that don't really have very high of a consciousness, and certainly are unable to interpret information of where it comes from. They've done no research. They've looked into nothing. It goes on and on. And they don't really seem to know even basic facts. So it's really sad, but this is what you run into in the entire world. But what's happened is that the entire, quote, West, this means Europe, because of an interesting reality that was caused by, again, here we go back to the Roman Egyptians, but the Romans. Now, the Romans, of course, ruled the world for the longest period of time. I think it's 600-700 years that they ruled the world, a lot of it. And no one else has been able to do that like they did. So that's a very long period of time to rule the world by using very tiny armies, by the way, to control large places of the universe, or I should say the planet Earthy. But as the decline of the Roman Empire, because they embraced the foreign, and guess what? What decline happened? Why did the Romans decline? Well, they embraced Middle Eastern belief systems, cowardice, and loser thought. Instead of propping up their great thinkers, which we're going to get into here as well, and how this infected the rest of society, who now holds philosophers like Kant and Sigmund Freud and Wilhelm Reich, all the scumbucket Arabs that have brought in Middle Eastern philosophies and destroyed the societies they're in. The Schopenhauers and all these other people that have preached you garbage. And of course, that's who you think are great philosophers, instead of the ancient Greeks, which are kind of talked about, but kindergarten, it's a kindergarten, all these Greeks and Romans, and nonsense. These are the people that had great philosophies and had practical information to give you, instead of Freud, who was a complete fraud, and all the rest of these people who just talked about negativity without answers, giving you philosophical conundrums, mental masturbation. And of course, this was the coup de grace, the final cutting of the throat of European society to disempower them. Now, where did all this come from? Well, the problem is that the Romans, trying to hold on to their empire, invented and connected to the weak-kneed, cowardice belief system that was propping itself up in the Middle East. And of course, this was the bogus and further empowered Jesus religion. Now, Christianity is another thing we have to talk about. And the problem is that Christianity and Christ consciousness, or Jesus the Christ. His last name wasn't Christ. It was Jesus the Christ, or it was the solar Christ who reached the highest level mankind could reach. It's still a level lower than the Gnostic reality that I have reached. But the bottom line, it was Christ consciousness, where you would think above the crowd. And of course, this thinking did what? It was very pacifist. Let somebody else handle it. Hey, we believe in Jesus. We can die. We don't have to fight. We be in heaven. We drink the beer. We all have a pod. Yeah. So this kind of bogus thinking was propagated on society, incorporating a ancient myth of the solar Christ, the highest level of light being. Well, this was all incorporated by the Romans, and then it was empowered by, and the Romans wrote books. They put people out there to be Christian priests because they wanted everybody to follow the non-fighting capacity. Now, you must remember that all pagan religions are based in reality. Whether you like them or not, it's all about growing food and killing your enemy, to put it succinctly. So this was not really something that worked with a dominating empire. If everybody's going to be geared into warriorism, you're going to have a difficult time enslaving them, keeping them, and expanding your empire. What you want is an image of a dead guy that gives himself up to the society, to the dominator, on a stick, and you give up your reality. Give up. Oh, it's okay. You're going to live forever in marshmallow heaven and candy cup world. Oh, yeah. Let's do that. Oh, who cares? Life is tough anyway. Crucify me, beat me, etc. Oh, it's all part of it. I got to remember that the crucifixion, impaling, and pretty much every type of perverted execution was, of course, invented by and perpetrated by the Persians, otherwise known as the Iranians, Germans, Deutschland, etc. So that's their heritage. Isn't that sweet? It's sweet. So that all came from them. Again, Middle Eastern ways of the most horrific torture that there is all came from. Horrific torture that they came from was all Persian. Of course, this is pre-Islamic, but the Islam embraced it, obviously. So that's where it all comes from as well. So the whole idea is by them trying to pacify society and embracing that philosophy was a way to keep their empire going instead of, and then ultimately to change up everything to say that, well, you don't have to believe in Roman gods. You don't have to believe in what we're doing, even though they did require that and for the populaces during their pagan times to worship and commit sacrifices, give credit to and energy to the gods. You were able to also practice any religion you want. The Romans allowed that, which kept their society and their colonies or conquered people together. What they did to try and change this, to control people, was they embraced Christianity, saying, well, it's not our religion. This is what's coming from us. It's not a Roman thing. It's a thing that is good for everybody. So everybody should become a Roman, and everybody should follow those belief systems and practices. Now, they did this while they were in great decline and at the brink of being failures. And of course, you've got to remember Romans ruled the world and ruled it well for 600 years because they were mostly, during that time, 95% of that time, they were, quote, pagans. When they took over Christianity, the fall of the Roman Empire was accelerated. So ironically, the Romans, who brought everything in and adopted the Greek philosophy and everything else, and again, remember, I'm simplifying everything. I'm a scholar, not exactly how it happened. Bozo, hey, go back to the gas station, jughead. So the whole idea is that this is the way things happen. So by doing that, to try and pacify and weaken all of these societies who had thousands of gods and had thousands of beliefs, they believed that they needed a national religion to bring people together and to control them. Certainly a good concept. And of course, this religion can't be based on killing your enemies, which would be the Roman guy next to you. It had to be that everyone was equal and we love area. Oh, sorry, I fell asleep then. So this is what they propagated there, and this was created by them. Because so what they took was general mythology of the time, using names and characters, and put it into this particular religion, and then pushed it on the peasants and allowed them to empower this and to believe in it. Unfortunately, when you give a religion to a bunch of very low-level murderous scumbuckets, you're not going to get much out of this no matter what the religion states. The most evil, rottenest people I know are people that are Christians who hate and want to destroy everybody else because they're non-Christians. The Romans, unfortunately, didn't get this. No. What they should have done was enforced upon people, and they tried this to a degree. They did this with the Huns. They did this with the Mongols, etc. They brought them into Roman society, and they said, "Look, we got the pizza, the pasta, and good life, huh? We show you how to do things right here, eh?" These people, of course, who were dedicated to their own personal society, did not encompass or want to join a better reality. I've seen this in my life. I've shown a lot of different apprentices. Well, here's the better stuff. Reject your past life, your stupid mothers, the crap you grew up on, and embrace the good stuff. And, people who are smart do that. You see something good, you see something smart, you say, hey, this is better than the nonsense that I was taught. Well, this doesn't work with most people. Most people don't recognize better stuff. They're stuck in their own culture and racial background. So this is what the Romans didn't get. So they brought these people in, including a whole bunch of rotten scumbuckets. They taught them for years, thinking, well, you're going to love Roman society. Look at the pizza. Hey, what, you want to give us up? You want to go back to eating crap you grind up and put in the condom? Hey, what's wrong with you? Yes, I do. Oh, I'm Hans the Crap Man. I like crap. So the whole idea is we run into this. So the Romans couldn't understand that. They brought these people in, and they actually trained Attila the Hun in military tactics and let him live in the Roman Empire for many years, as they'd done with all the other people that betrayed them, particularly the inexperienced emperor and person who conquered most of Germania, or who took the Roman legions there, who then were led into the most ridiculous traps that possibly. I mean, this guy was a total jerk. Who allowed this German scumbucket to set him up in unbelievable ways. But he was inexperienced. He wasn't a military person. I think he was a clerk. Who the hell knows this guy? Typical idiots, kind of like the American military we have today. Deviants, freaks, cowards that haven't won a war in 200 years. So we get into all this stuff, and we have to fully understand the reality of that. So the Romans didn't quite get it. They tried to hold on to their empire by weakening people with this crap belief system. Don't worry about it, dude. You go to heaven and live forever. Just bend over and take the sword in your back. So this worked for a while, but it didn't go further. They should have took the high road and changed people into being Gnostic level understanders and giving up their culture and racial background and supporting something that was better. But that's a very hard sell for most people. The worst thing you can do is go into your culture, go into your race, go into your sex, and cement your feet in that reality, because you're living in a fantasy world when you do that, and a very contrived idiot belief system. I believe this because I'm a woman. I believe this because I'm French. I believe this because I'm American. And this is what people do all the time. It's really amusing when you see this, when it is based in absolutely nothing. So the Romans created that religion, and they then made it into the monster it is today, with the really low-level people that believe that nonsense. And again, the Christ consciousness reality predates Christianity by thousands of years. It was the higher level of light God and light being, where you were pure, wonderful, and empowered, and has nothing to do with Christ consciousness or Jesus-ism that is perpetrated today. Very important that you understand that, because that's the reality of what's going on. So by them adopting this and doing it, doomed their empire. It also created a very perverse priesthood of decadence, lies, and filth, as we can generally put it. But what happened with all this? When they did that and they decided to adapt this fantasy religion, this then, of course, they were the main distributor of culture, realities, roads, dams, everything else, everything in Europe that has been built of any great extent comes from the Romans. But, you got to remember, this is not a few years or even 100 years before what we consider Europe as the medieval periods. This is hundreds of years before that. And ever since the Romans left Europe, not a single thing has been built of any note. Plain and simple. Things like Notre Dame Cathedral took 800 years to build and apparently is burned to a crisp now by looters and freaks. Of course, this continued into modern times as these great cities of Rome and Paris were burnt, destroyed, and polluted by the filth of the Middle Easterners, otherwise known as the Deutsches, the Iranians. But that wasn't good enough, as their culture was rejected and destroyed by the real Westerners, the Brits, the synergistic Americans, where all the European cultures went to. And you got to remember that America was a culture built by Europeans. Certainly other people had effects, but these are very minor when we look at the bigger picture. Yes, in the West, the Chinese built the railroads. Yes, there was a lot of Latin influence in Florida and other places, but the United States was a British colony. The British are mostly German, and they had the British colonies, the 13 colonies, which is how America originated. Plain and simple. That's what built America, whether you like it or not. These are facts again. If you have a problem with the facts, well, that's just because you're a dumb, stupid, prejudiced person who wants to live in a fantasy comic book world and not face the facts. History is history. It's facts. Now, if you want to take that as positive or negative, that's your problem. As I've stated from the beginning, there are no good people or races or groups. There are good individuals out there, period. It doesn't matter whether their sexuality, their race, or religion, or anything else. There's just good people. So we all have to understand that. So if you object to that, it just shows you how stupid you are. So the reality of that is that's what America is and was built on. The 13 British colonies. That's why we had a flag that had 13 stars representing the 13 British colonies that were funded by, supported by, and formed America were British colonies. No, there wasn't Middle Eastern colonies. There wasn't Brazilian colonies. There wasn't African colonies. There was none of this. They were British colonies who landed on Plymouth Rock. Was the Plymouth, or the Pilgrims, as I like to call them, were Brits, the Mayflower people. They were not Julio, Macagoul, and all the other people. It just wasn't that. And that's not putting anybody down. It's a fact. So, but that wasn't good enough. After being crushed in 2 world wars and rejecting on a very strong level the Middle Eastern philosophies that this Middle European culture had, the Antichrist culture of Middle Europe, which are the people that indoctrinated this, led by the Austrians, the Swiss, and the Germans, who then further indoctrinated people like the French and other ones who have all perverted this, but to understand that. But that was not enough for them. They had to indoctrinate and take it. So what you can't do with tanks, you do with banks. And that's what I always say with it. The EU is an invasion by banks and not by tanks, because intrinsically these Middle Eastern types are coward scumbuckets that can't win anything and hide and will stab you in the back. They're not going to fight. We have a long history of these cultures losing and constantly losing, and they have no chance of ever winning on a battlefield. They have a chance of winning, as they have done, in a manipulated structure, taking people who are delusional, people who are ignorant, who somehow are easily tricked, and making them fight for you, which is what's happened in this Middle Eastern culture that has taken over the world and perpetrates itself with this antichrist realities, otherwise known as the German thinking. That's all very interesting. We all have to quite understand that. We're going to go over all this and how this plot has went on for many years and how to take over Western thinking by incorporating or making the prominent thought forms in Western thinking to be Middle Eastern belief systems, which are not in the higher systems of empowerment that we learned from the Greeks and the Romans, who were kind of given credit, kind of a backhand, oh, they're kind of old, stupid, and gay. We don't want to take them too much. And ignoring them while we push ahead the Middle Eastern depressive, lying misinterpretation of life realities that we get now from the prominent philosophers taught in, quote, Western world as the prominent people, the Freuds, the Reichs, we can go on and on with all these goofballs. I mean, it's unbelievable, including their bogus science. Kant, how many we got? Freud, why we go with all of them? They're all goofballs. Schopenhauer, the negative little scumbucket he was. And of course, even he had problems perpetrating his lies and then went into the Vedic documents, trying to tap into that perverted reality that we get from the Indian sector of talk, which apparently was infected by the Aryans who came across these areas. When people think of philosophers, they don't really think of the ancient Greek and Roman, and particularly Roman philosophers who had answers for everything. Like Marcus Aurelius, who told you how to live, who was a great Roman Empire, who helped rule the world, is totally ignored. Who formed the basis, or one of those, with Stoic philosophy. No, we got to believe in Freud. Well, you want to screw your mother. It's all part of the psychology. I've never been in psychotherapy. I know really nothing. I'm Freud. Another sexual psychotic, like all the Middle Eastern things, because they're really possessed by sexuality. And of course, that's why they need to dominate women, because they don't want to give them free thought, because any free thought woman wouldn't be with the Middle Eastern type people and how they treat people. So they would reject that. So you've got to dominate and keep them as slaves. And of course, that's the major part of Islam. And the appeal of Islam is that, hey, you got sex slaves, baby. Woo-hoo. Men, women, boys, girls, everybody. You, as the king of your family, can do it. And we'll support you. Goo-goo-goo. So the assassination, the butchering of Western thought was done by this foreign group of people who settled in Switzerland, Austria, and Germany primarily. And we'll go into all these in the next part of this fascinating talk, which I hope you will listen to many times over and over again so you get it. Or maybe you won't. And then you'll live in the world of fantasy lies and destruction. Here you got the truth. You don't pay attention to it, well, you're living up to your cultural background of being stooges. So watch for the next part.